I couldn't ignore this week when I was looking through the Herald Sun and thinking about the theme of the service today, the parable of the leaven, or the parable of the yeast. And I read this from the Herald Sun, Tuesday the 1st of August. We are told, there may be some truth behind the happy little Vegemite jingle. Because research by Victoria University has found that people who eat yeast-based spreads are less anxious and stressed than those who abstain. More than 500 people throughout the world were surveyed online. They were asked whether they ate yeast-based spreads, which ones, how often, and those that did consume them, their moods monitored using a psychological tool. And we are told, we found that those who ate yeast-based spreads had lower levels of anxiety and stress compared to those who ate none. So the answer is, go out and dig into that Vegemite, let me tell you. It's lovely. I had to share that with you. And of course, that's just a little piece that relates to our ordinary lives, or our eating Vegemite. And so that's what the parables are all about. It's just about relating to ordinary things in our lives. And what we have in this tiny little parable, the parable of the leaven, or the yeast, is just that. It's a wonderful personal recollection of Jesus. Because, of course, in every Palestinian home, bread making was taking place every day. It was the stuff of life. It would be the regular thing in every single household. And Jesus would have seen his mum, it would have been his mum, of course, he would have seen his mum making the bread. And he recalls that when he just shares this little parable. Well, we know it well, don't we, the parable of the yeast, and we read it again this morning. We know that, well, of course, yeast changes bread, doesn't it? And so we say, so does the message of the kingdom. We think that's what it's trying to say. But I want to, this morning, just consider it a wee bit more. In Hebrew thought and language, the leaven was a synonym for evil, for evil influence, as it is elsewhere in the New Testament. In Mark chapter 18, Jesus advises his disciples to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And twice in Paul's writings to Corinth and to Galatia, he uses the same word, the leaven, when he is exhorting people to have nothing to do with evil things. When somebody entered the Jewish religion and then perhaps relapsed back into their Gentile ways, the rabbis had a phrase. They described it as returning to the leaven. See, the Jews believed that in every person there were two opposite tendencies, one drawing to goodness and one to evil. These they called the good nature and the bad nature. And they called the bad nature the leaven. And in preparation for Passover, the most holy of all festivals in the Jewish calendar, every single scrap of leaven had to be cleared out of the house. It had to be moved because it represented evil. So you see, this is not just a casual use of this term. Jesus is deliberately using this term for a purpose. And I think one of the great biblical scholars who specialized in studying the parables, C.H. Dodd, in his book, The Parables of the Kingdom, talks about this. And he gets it right when he sees this leaven as a symbol of the disturbing influence of Christianity. I quote him, "We should observe," he says, "that the working of the leaven in the dough is not a slow, imperceptible process. At first, it is true, the leaven's hidden, and nothing appears to happen. But soon the whole mass swells and bubbles as fermentation rapidly advances, as the whole thing is a disturbed mass." It's spot on. C.H. Dodd gets this absolutely right, because as the leaven turned the dough into a seething mass, so the influence of Christianity was profoundly disturbing. It is true that real religion is always disturbing. Way back in the Old Testament, when Ahab, the evil king, came face to face with Elijah, one of the great prophets of the Old Testament, he described him as a troubler, a disturber of Israel. All the great prophets of the Old Testament saw it as their duty to disturb, to shake things up, to make them think. And then when Christianity in the New Testament came to Thessalonica, the cry was, and I quote from Acts chapter 17, "These men have turned the world upside down." And in Philippi, the accusation against Paul and his friends was this, quoting again from Acts, "These Jews are disturbing our city." Real religion is always disturbing. It's a long way, isn't it, from the gentle Jesus, meek and mild stuff. What we're talking here is real revolutionary stuff. One of the most revolutionary documents in the whole world is the Magnificat, Luke chapter 1, right at the beginning of Luke's gospel. You'll remember it. "He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He's put down the mighty from their thrones and exalted those of low degree. He's filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent empty away." And those short 3 verses in that first chapter of Luke, there's phenomenal, revolutionary, or disturbing statements, which Christianity, if it is true to what it is about, is bound to carry out. So firstly, there is, in this disturbing faith that we claim, there is a moral revolution. These words in the Magnificat, "The proud are brought down." We need to look at within ourselves and push away consideration for ourselves in favor of consideration for others. It's really hard. It's really hard because automatically, it's just part of being human, automatically we give ourselves first priority. Andrew Bolt recently was propounding his anti-environment agenda I saw him on the TV the other night, by arguing the stupidity of Australia committing itself to a range of climate-saving policies. Because he said, we only represent a small percentage of the world, and so we should just put ourselves first, and to hell with everybody else. My response to that is, as you can imagine, is no, no, and no. This is the same attitude to refugees, even often to people who've reached rock bottom in our society. We hear, oh, it's their own fault, we say. This is something that we need to really change within ourselves, that attitude. Alcibiades was a close friend of Socrates. He was described in literature as wild and restless. And he is recorded as often saying to Socrates, I hate you, for every time I meet you, you make me realize what I truly am. This is the same with us. When we really meet the spirit of the Mediterranean Jewish peasant. Not in the dusty paths of Galilee, but on the hardened pavements of Melbourne, or the sand dunes of Seaford, or the shopping centres of Chadstone. And as we look at this Galilean peasant whom we call Jesus or Christ, we see something that we aspire to, an aspiration. I was walking my dog through the streets of Camberwell early one morning, my beautiful dog Oscar, and this is what we do. We walk and we get to the end of the pavement by a road and we stop, and he sits down. And I go, heel, and he walks a bit further. And then we get to the next road, and I don't even have to say stop. He just stops. And he sits, and he waits for the command. And as I'm doing that, there was a lady on the other side of the road with her Labrador, as it happens, who was pulling and all over the shop, and she shouted across the road to me, she said, that is what I'm aspiring to. I felt pretty good. When we look at this man, this Christ, we look at him and what he said and he did, and we say, this is what we are aspiring to. And that is a moral revolution. And the second thing is the social revolution. In the Magnificat, it says, the mighty are brought low, and those of low degree are exalted. This is because Christianity has no respect for labels. The labels that the world attaches, they don't really have anything to do with Christianity, because often, you see, we place people, we all do it. I'm the first to do it. We place people according to the size of their bank account, the number of people they control, their prestige, their fame, their ability to kick a football, to play the guitar, to hit a tennis ball, the family they've been born into, their ability to talk and be interviewed on television. That's how we rate them. Christianity rates people by the service they render to others. Mark chapter 10, whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. In the old days of pre-revolutionary Russia, when people often kept open houses, people would join them for dinner, and anyone who came. Anyone who wanted to come could just come. It was an open house. And a person's place at the table was decided by one simple test. When they arrived, the host would say, show me your hands. And if the hands were toil-worn with blisters and broken fingernails, indicating real work. The guest would receive a high place, but if they were soft and plabby, they were directed to the lowest seat. So the test within the kingdom of God is the test of service, what we do. This is truly a social revolution. And the third thing is this, an economic revolution. The Magnificat says, the hungry are filled with good things, and the rich are sent empty away. Pretty stark, isn't it? You see, in the truly Christian state, there would be such a feeling of responsibility that no one could bear to have too much, while others had so little. One renowned theologian puts it this way. He says, and I quote, "Business would be run not for its owners only, but to support the needs of the community. No farmer would plow solely for financial gain, but to feed a hungry world. No doctor or lawyer would practice for themselves alone, but to heal and to help those in distress. Every work would be directed to the healing and to the helping and the supplying of the spiritual and physical needs of men and women." Like it or not, the economic revolution is the Christian aim. In Australia, right now, the 3 wealthiest people in this country of ours, the 3 wealthiest people earn more than the bottom million. Doesn't sound like an economic revolution to me. It is clear that if you take this leaven as a disturbing influence, this parable teaches the disturbing influence of Christianity on the life of the individual and of the world, and that this disturbance can dramatically change things. I believe that there is a transforming message of Christianity. I believe that to follow the way of Christ and to be open to the power of the Spirit around us can really and truly change people. I remember talking to a young woman when I first started as the CEO of Melbourne City Mission. I was sitting on the pavement. She was homeless and had been for a couple of years. She'd been living on the streets. She appeared to have no future. She looked pretty sickly to me. But with the right support and love and direction, her life changed dramatically. She's now, I heard, the reason why she's in my mind is that I heard from her this week. She's just got a new job. She's got a new job, she's got a little house, she's got a little car, she's got a whole new life from 6-7 years ago living on the streets of this city. I used to do a simple conjuring trick with my, it's a long time ago now, he's nearly 40, my eldest son, Andrew. You know the trick. You, unbeknown to the person, you take a matchstick and you stick it in the hem of the handkerchief. And then you say, "Come on, son." He would have been about 7 or 8 at the time. I was trying to impress him as a very powerful, influential, and magic-revealing dad. And I had my handkerchief out, and I said, "Get a match." And he put the match in the center of the handkerchief, and we fold it up. And then I'd say, "Break the match." And he'd break the match, thinking he was breaking the one in the middle, but not, of course. He was breaking the one in the hem. And so consequently, I would open it up, and sure enough, there would be a complete and whole match. And he used to love that. He used to ask me to do it time and time again. And one of his favorite responses afterwards, he'd exclaim, "It's Dad! He's done it again! He's mended the broken match!" I look at that young girl who I met living on the streets, 6 or 7 years ago. I look at her. I think of our faith. I think about our Christian message. I think about the power of the Spirit. And I say, he's done it again. He's mended the broken match. For something that was shattered and in pieces and broken has been made complete and whole. And I believe that there are countless, of course, examples of the social way in which Christianity has and must continue to transform the lives of individuals and the world. And it starts with us here and now. We can do it. The Jew, when he was praying at the time of the life of Jesus, would pray in his morning prayer to thank God that he had not been made a Gentile, a slave, or a woman. There might be people today who might pray a similar prayer, that they're not black, or they're not Muslim, or they're not LGBTI. You see, this is the same message for those all who are disadvantaged. In the pagan world, the sick were considered a nuisance. In Sparta, children, when they were born, were submitted to the town examiners. And if they were fit, they were allowed to live. And if they were disabled, they were put on a mountainside to die. There is a well-known letter from a man from ancient Greece, a man by the name of Hilarion, who writes to his wife Alice when he is away from Alexandria. And he writes, "If you bear a child, if it is a boy, let it live. If it is a girl, throw it out." Those are the attitudes of the day. These were the circumstances which Jesus came to address, and which the church and people of faith have been addressing ever since. Remember that the first blind asylum, and that's what they were called then, was founded by Thalassius, a Christian monk. The first free dispensary was founded by Apollonius, a Christian merchant. The first hospital was founded by Fabiola, a Christian woman. Christianity was the first faith in the world to be interested in and committed to the broken things of life. And so, historically, our faith has played a huge part in turning things round throughout all ages. It has disturbed the status quo. It was Christianity that was responsible for fighting against slavery. It was Christianity that brought education into the world and schools. It was Christianity that fought for civil rights in the southern states of the USA and against apartheid in South Africa. And so it should still be today as we look around those terrible injustices that we see every day. This challenges the church. It challenges the church that so often wants a peaceful life. Listen to these words from Martin Luther King Jr. He was in prison at the time in Birmingham, in Alabama. He writes, Wherever the early Christians entered a town, the power structure got disturbed and immediately sought to convict them for disturbing the peace and for being outside agitators. But they went on with the conviction that they were a colony of heaven and had to obey God rather than man. They were a small in number but big in commitment. They were too God-intoxicated, he says, to be intimidated. They brought an end to such ancient evils as infanticide and gladiatorial contests. Martin Luther King continues. Things are different now, he says. The contemporary church is so often a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. It is so often the arch supporter of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silent and often vocal sanction of things as they are. Father Trevor Huddleston, a great Christian leader at the time of apartheid in South Africa, would open his church against all the laws of that country at the time to black and white people. And they would come and they would fill his congregation. And he would be arrested and put in prison time and time again. And when accused of being an agitator, he said, a Christian always is if he's true to his calling. Listen to John Wesley. Have you not read that the Prince of Peace was a disturber of the public peace? Or of George Fox, who was described as a disturber of the nation? The great philosopher Spinoza, he says, I do not know how to teach philosophy without becoming a disturber of the peace. We've got a revolution to get on with if we really do want to be the leaven, the yeast, the disturber. We can start today. Today. By getting onto that phone and by getting onto emails and ringing your local member of parliament and telling him or her that you support marriage equality. And if you don't know their number, you can go to the website which is called Equality, and you can put in your postcode and it will tell you your member of parliament name and number. Let's become a disturber of the peace and follow the teaching of Jesus when he tells us in the parable of the leaven.